As we turn to the topic of infant baptism, we think of all kinds of questions that people raise in opposition to why we shouldn't baptize our children. And I think of Charles Spurgeon, I'm paraphrasing him, but he basically says, we have looked thoroughly in the scriptures and we do not find infant baptism, and therefore the conclusion has got to be from someone coming from that persuasion that it's made up, it is maybe a sentimental tradition. There's all kinds of ways we could talk about it, a wet dedication or that kind of thing. How would you answer someone who is seeking to be biblical in what they're doing in their church and in their worship practices? So a real godly concern there, and coming to the conclusion, infant baptism is not biblical. What would you say to point in the other direction and say, indeed, this is biblical?
Yeah, that's a huge question. But in simple terms, going back to, I mentioned the Noah story in 1 Peter 3, or the Israelites in Exodus, or in 1 Corinthians 10, pointing back to Exodus, including Noah and his wife, his sons and their daughter, or sons and their wives, so sons and daughters-in-law. But we're told that Noah was a believer, right? Noah was the man who was righteous, but yet 8 people are saved. We're told that Israel passes through and they're all saved, but yet, for the next 40 years, all these grumblers are going to die,
right?
In their unbelief, right? And there's kids there, and there's babies, and there's servants, and there's people just kind of latching on because whatever is going on there. Maybe the Egyptians are joining and so forth.
Right.
Outsiders, Midianites and whatnot. So, what's going on? So we would that's how we would start. We would start from the Old Testament and go forward and say, all throughout the Bible, from the beginning and into the New Testament, God is a God who makes promises and keeps his promises for believers and their children, and all within their household, right? So you have God giving circumcision to Abraham and says, it's for him and for his kids and for all those who are in his household, servants and so forth, all males. So you have that language of believers and children. We call it covenant, right? So God makes covenant and includes in the covenant, sphere, realm, not just believing Abraham, but also his sons, Isaac and Ishmael. One of them is an unbeliever, but yet he tells Abraham to circumcise Ishmael. So and then he circumcises Isaac, and then he passes it down as well. There's Jacob and Esau. So all throughout the Bible, there is the pattern of God working in a more corporate way than we're used to, as American, 21st century Americans, just Americans in general, and so we get to passages in the New Testament. So Acts, right? There's the Acts 2. For all those who believe and are baptized, the promises for you and for your children and for all who are far off. So that language of Acts 2, your children, all who are far off, I would argue comes right from Genesis chapter 15, when God gives the circumcision command to Abram, and he tells him it's for him, all his males 8 days old and above, and servants, everyone else. So you, your children, all who are far off. That threefold category. People say, and so on Pentecost, they heard the gospel, and believers were baptized. So clearly, right, it was believers, and we would grant that, yes, when the gospel is proclaimed and people hear, people who can intelligently hear and respond, and are baptized, those are believers. Presumably of some, mental ability to be able to hear something, understand something, see their need, cry out to God for salvation, and willingly assent to being baptized. But then in the book of Acts, you have also throughout that story, those stories, where households are included in baptism. So Cornelius, for example, or the Philippian jailer. We're told that one believes and that the whole house is baptized. some people might say, well, yeah, because everyone who heard the gospel when Peter came to preach, in town, came to Cornelius' house, or when Paul preached to the Philippian jailer at his house, everybody who heard it believed, right? So believer's baptism. But it's interesting in Acts, I believe it's 16 with the Philippian jailer, we're told that, they're singing and he hears, he's going to kill himself, right? The jailer, because the door's open, they're gone. And in Roman law, a jailer was responsible for those that he was overseeing in jail. And if they broke out or whatever, it was death penalty. That's why it was so serious. He was gonna die because he lost charge of the people that were under him. But they were like, no, don't do that. And what should I do to be saved? Believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, should be saved. He takes them to their house, or takes them to his house, and we're then told that the whole house, Acts 16, the whole house rejoiced and were baptized, and then we're told why, because he believed. So there's plural and singular verbs in New Testament language of Greek. And so they all, plural, rejoiced. They all, plural, were baptized. And the reason is given is that he, singular, believed. So again, that's that pattern goes all the way back to the Old Testament. Righteous Noah and his household were saved. Abram is circumcised, and he circumcises his children and his all males, that he had charge of, his servants, those who cared for his flocks, and so forth. So that pattern continues in the New Testament, and this would be why, we read in, say, Ephesians 6, when Paul writes to the whole church in Ephesus, he actually addresses children because they would have been with the assembled congregation when that letter was first read. He addresses fathers, wives, husbands, wives, parents, fathers especially, children, servants. He addresses them because they were all considered part of the family, right? The church, the covenant, the people. And he says to the children in Ephesians 6, obey your parents in the Lord. And, so we would see that as, well, he can say that of all children of believers in Ephesus, not because he had some secret insight that every single child in the congregation believed, but that they are included with their parents in the family of God, in the corporate community. And so he tells them to obey their parents in the Lord, because it's his way of saying, at least outwardly speaking, you are believers, you're Christians, right? You belong to the family, and so they can obey, and they have to serve. So their parents. So, anyways, yeah, it's for us, it's a way of reading the Bible from beginning to end, to see lots of continuity, lots of similarity from Old to New Testament, and that pattern of the circumcision of, in the Old Testament it was males, 8 days. In the New Testament, baptism now is given to, it's not just males, it's males and females. So in the New Covenant, that promise is, and that sign is now more expansive, and more are included in the promise. So yeah, it's how we read the Bible. It's and that pattern of a believer and anyone in his household being included in circumcision or baptism, that is never revoked. It's never taken away. And lots of things are abolished, right, in the New Testament. We no longer go to the temple in Jerusalem and make sacrifices. We no longer have priests who wear special vestments, right, of a certain family line. There are several things like that. We don't worship on the 6th day anymore. Or the 7th day, we worship on the 1st day. So certain things are abolished, and clearly the New Testament says some things are ended, but everything else we take it as the continuation of it, because the Bible is one big book and it's one big story.